They laughed when I ate the lizard. No one at the Galactic Academy of Universal Sciences had ever seen a human before, let alone one that willingly consumed a skittering, six-legged Ralkir during lunchtime. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the gravity stabilizers. Eyes, compound, glowing, multifaceted, locked on me, the lone representative of Earth in the entire academy. "What?" I said around a mouthful of crispy Ralkir tail. "Tastes like chicken." The Virixian next to me, a towering insectoid with mandibles the size of my forearm, chittered in horror. "You are not supposed to eat those. They're used for cleaning food trays." "Well, that explains the aftertaste," I replied, tossing the rest of the carcass onto my plate. My peers recoiled, their appendages curling, their bioluminescent patches dimming. To them, I had just committed an act of barbarism. To me, it was Tuesday. That moment defined my reputation at the Academy, though not in the way anyone expected. The Academy was a sprawling, glittering beacon of galactic cooperation, where species from across the stars sent their brightest minds to learn and coexist. In theory, anyway. In practice, it was a hierarchy of cliques, with Earth at the bottom. Humans were the new kids on the block, and no one took us seriously. We were weak, small, unremarkable. To the galaxy, we were the underdogs of evolution. Soft flesh encasing fragile bones, no claws, no natural weapons. They forgot about one thing: adaptability. My first combat simulation class was a disaster. Each student was required to demonstrate their species' natural survival tactics in a simulated hostile environment. For the others, it was an opportunity to showcase their raw power. The Letharian crushed their enemies under sheer weight. The Kargani, quadrupedal predators, used speed and razor-sharp fangs to overwhelm their targets. When my turn came, I was met with polite disinterest. What could a human possibly do? The instructor, a hulking Grolox with leathery gray skin, activated the simulation. A hostile environment materialized. Dense jungle, hostile fauna, minimal resources. I had 10 minutes to survive. At first I froze. The simulation seemed designed to exploit every human weakness. The others snickered. "Perhaps the humans should sit this one out," someone muttered. But then instinct took over. I didn't fight the environment, I used it. While the others would have charged headlong into the simulated predators, I crafted weapons from the surrounding materials. Primitive, sure, but effective. A sharpened stick became a spear. A pile of leaves became a trap. When the predators finally came for me, they found themselves outmaneuvered, ambushed, outsmarted. By the time the simulation ended, the audience was silent. I hadn't just survived, I had dominated. "You turned the predators into prey," the Grolox said, his deep voice tinged with something that might have been respect. "Yeah," I said, brushing dirt off my uniform. "That's kind of our thing." Word spread quickly. Humans might be physically unimpressive, but we were terrifyingly clever. The same adaptability that let us thrive on Earth's diverse biomes made us exceptional at improvisation. That realization shifted how my peers saw me, but not in a good way. They started testing me, each species trying to prove themselves superior. First, it was simple challenges. A Jiraxian bet I couldn't beat him in strength, so I leveraged a rudimentary pulley system to lift a weight he couldn't budge. A Kargani mocked my speed, so I set traps that ensured I didn't need to be faster, only smarter. Each time I won, and each time, the stakes escalated. The Academy hosted an annual tournament to showcase the students' abilities. It wasn't supposed to be lethal, but accidents happened. Accidents were also conveniently more frequent when someone wanted to make a point. When the tournament began, I was an easy target. My first match was against a Zorvath, a six-limbed combat specialist with a carapace harder than titanium. He towered over me in the arena, his spiked arms glinting under the artificial lights. The crowd roared, certain of my defeat. "Let's get this over with, human," the Zorvath growled, his voice like grinding stone. I didn't reply. Instead, I moved, darting to the left and grabbing a handful of sand from the arena floor. When he lunged, I threw it in his compound eyes. He roared in pain, momentarily blinded. That's when I struck. Quick, calculated hits to his joints, exploiting the weaknesses in his exoskeleton. He collapsed, unable to continue. The crowd was stunned. I didn't rely on brute strength or speed. I used strategy, exploiting vulnerabilities no one else saw. By the time I reached the semifinals, the whispers had turned into roars. The human was no longer a joke. I had become something else entirely, a predator among prey. But my success painted a target on my back. My next opponent wasn't a student, but a faculty member, a special guest brought in to enhance the challenge. It was clear what was happening. I wasn't supposed to win. The Grolok's combat instructor stepped into the arena, his massive frame casting a long shadow. "You've done well," he said, cracking his knuckles. "But this ends here." I knew I couldn't beat him in raw power. His kind were designed for combat, with dense musculature and thick hide impervious to most weapons. But I also knew that brute strength wasn't everything. The bell rang. He charged, and I ran. Not out of fear, but to lure him into the traps I had secretly prepared before the match. A tripwire here, a spike pit there. It wasn't enough to incapacitate him, but it slowed him down, forcing him to expend energy while I stayed out of reach. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or jeer. This wasn't how fights were supposed to go, but I didn't care about their expectations. For humans, survival wasn't about playing by the rules. It was about rewriting them. The Grolok was relentless, smashing through obstacles with brute force. But as the minutes ticked by, his movements grew slower, more labored. That's when I struck, exploiting the fatigue I had engineered. A well-placed blow to the back of his knee sent him crashing to the ground. Before he could recover, I placed a makeshift spear at his throat. "Yield," I said, breathing heavily. For a moment, the arena was silent. Then slowly, the Groloks nodded. "I yield." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others roared in outrage. I didn't care. I had proven my point. But as I left the arena, I could feel the stares. Some of respect, others of fear. For the first time in galactic history, humanity wasn't seen as weak. We were something far more dangerous, adaptable, unpredictable, unstoppable. And the tournament wasn't over yet. The days following my victory were tense. My peers didn't just see me differently, they treated me differently. The ones who had mocked me before now avoided eye contact, their antennae or tentacles twitching nervously when I passed. The Letharian I'd beaten in an earlier round even moved its table when I entered the dining hall. That was the thing about being seen as a predator. Respect and fear were two sides of the same coin. But not everyone kept their distance. Some didn't like the idea of a human climbing the ranks, and they made that abundantly clear. The day after my semi-final match, a group of Kargani cornered me in one of the Academy's hydroponic gardens. There were 3 of them, each a quadruped mass of muscle and fur, their jagged teeth glinting under the artificial sunlight. Their leader, a hulking brute named Korgath, growled as he blocked my path. "You think you're special, Earthling?" he spat. His voice had a guttural quality, like rocks grinding together. "You're a fluke, a fragile little meatbag who got lucky." I raised an eyebrow. "Lucky? Last I checked, I've beaten everything you've thrown at me." The other 2 Kargani growled, their claws scraping against the ground. Korgath stepped closer, his snout inches from my face. "That ends now. We don't need to wait for the finals to remind you of your place." I could feel the tension building, the primal instinct that told me I was outnumbered and outmatched. But fear wasn't something I could afford anymore. If I backed down, I'd lose more than my dignity. I'd lose the reputation I'd fought so hard to build. "All right," I said, my voice steady. "Let's settle it here. No weapons. Just us." Korgath's grin widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "You just made a mistake, human." He lunged. I sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the swipe of his claws. His momentum carried him forward, and I used it to my advantage, delivering a swift kick to his exposed side. He snarled, recovering quickly, but I didn't give him a chance to regroup. I grabbed a nearby irrigation pipe and swung it with all the force I could muster, catching him across the jaw. The other 2 moved in, but I was already improvising. I yanked a vine from one of the plants and used it as a makeshift whip, lashing at their faces to keep them at bay. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Within minutes, Korgath was on the ground, his allies nursing bruises and cuts. "You want to try again?" I asked, panting. They didn't. The incident only added to my growing reputation. Word spread like wildfire, and by the time the finals approached, it felt like half the academy was watching my every move. Some wanted me to win, cheering for the underdog who had defied every expectation. Others just wanted to see me fall. The finals were announced 2 days later. My opponent wasn't a fellow student. No, they weren't even from this galaxy. The academy had brought in a champion, a creature known as a Zarnax. The name alone sent whispers rippling through the student body. Zarnax were legendary predators, apex hunters from a death world so hostile that only 1 in 10 of their kind reached adulthood. They were fast, strong, and ruthlessly intelligent. If the Grolox was a battering ram, the Zarnax was a scalpel. When I saw it for the first time, I understood the fear. The Zarnax was tall, lean, and sinewy, with a body built for killing. Its skin was a matte black that seemed to absorb light, and its eyes glowed faintly, a predatory red. Its claws were razor sharp, its tail tipped with a venomous barb. It didn't just look dangerous, it looked lethal. The arena was packed for the finals. The spectators were louder than ever, their cheers and jeers echoing off the high walls. The Zarnax entered first, its movements fluid and precise like a coiled spring ready to strike. When I stepped in, the noise rose to a deafening roar. The announcer began the formalities, but I wasn't listening. My eyes were locked on the Zarnax. It stood there perfectly still, its gaze boring into me. This wasn't going to be like the other matches. There would be no room for error, no time to think. Every second would be a fight for survival. The bell rang. The Zarnax moved first, a blur of motion that was almost impossible to track. I barely dodged in time, its claws slicing through the air where my head had been. I scrambled back, trying to put distance between us, but it was relentless. Every attack was precise, every movement calculated. I had to adapt, and fast. I grabbed a handful of sand and threw it toward its face, but it saw through the move, leaping back effortlessly. This wasn't going to be like the others. The Zarnax wasn't just a predator, it was a strategist. I changed tactics. Instead of running, I moved toward it, staying low and unpredictable. It slashed at me again, but I ducked under its strike and lashed out with a kick, aiming for its knee. It barely flinched. My attacks weren't doing enough damage, and I could feel exhaustion creeping in. That's when I noticed the arena itself. The walls were lined with jagged outcroppings of stone, and the floor was uneven, with patches of soft sand and hard rock. It wasn't much, but it was something. I started moving again, using the environment to my advantage. I led the Zarnax toward the rough terrain, forcing it to adjust its footing. It stumbled, just for a moment, but it was enough. I grabbed a loose rock and hurled it at its head. It deflected the projectile with its claws, but the distraction gave me an opening. I lunged forward, driving my shoulder into its midsection, knocking it off balance. The crowd roared, the noise almost drowning out the pounding of my heart. I had landed a blow, but the Zarnax wasn't finished. It recovered quickly, its glowing eyes narrowing with something that might have been respect or annoyance. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Zarnax circled me, its glowing eyes narrowing as it reassessed its approach. I was breathing hard, sweat dripping into my eyes, but I wasn't going to let it see weakness. Every second that passed without it attacking was a second I could use to think, to plan. It struck again, faster this time. Its claws blurred through the air, forcing me to roll to the side. The movement sent a sharp pain through my shoulder. I'd scraped it against one of the jagged rocks lining the arena floor. Blood trickled down my arm, but I ignored it. Pain was just another problem to solve. I needed to change the game. The Zarnax had the advantage in speed, strength, and endurance. I couldn't beat it by playing fair. As it lunged again, I dove for one of the jagged stone outcroppings, gripping the sharp edge with both hands. The Zarnax turned, tail whipping through the air, venomous barbs striking where I'd been a heartbeat earlier. It was toying with me now, drawing out the fight. The crowd cheered louder with each near miss, their excitement feeding the beast's confidence. Good. Let it think it's in control. I clambered onto the rock outcropping, deliberately leaving myself exposed. The Zarnax took the bait, leaping at me with predatory grace. At the last moment, I dropped to the ground, yanking a loose chunk of rock from the formation. The Zarnax collided with the jagged surface, its claws sinking into the stone to keep from falling. That was my opening. I swung the rock upward with all the strength I had left, catching the Zarnax on the side of its head. The blow wasn't enough to knock it out, but it was enough to daze it. It stumbled, its movements less fluid, less precise. For the first time, it looked mortal. I pressed the advantage, dodging its sluggish strikes and forcing it toward the uneven terrain. The crowd roared as I drove it back, step by step. The Zarnax lashed out with its tail, the venomous barbs slicing through the air. I ducked under it, grabbing a handful of sand and throwing it into its face. The beast hissed, momentarily blinded. That was when I struck the final blow. I grabbed another jagged rock and drove it into the soft joint between its carapace and torso. The Zarnax let out a guttural roar, collapsing to the ground. Its glowing eyes flickered, then dimmed as it lay motionless. The crowd erupted, their cheers shaking the arena. I stood there, chest heaving, blood dripping from my wounds, but I didn't look at them. My gaze stayed on the Zarnax, watching for any sign of movement. None came. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena. "Victor! The human!" I dropped the rock, my hands trembling as adrenaline drained from my body. The Zarnax was still alive, barely. Medics rushed into the arena to tend to it, but the fight was over. I had won. The Academy would never see humans the same way again. After the match, I was swarmed by students, some offering congratulations, others simply staring as if I'd grown a second head. For so long, humans had been seen as weak, insignificant. But in that moment, I represented something more. The ability to adapt, to survive, to overcome impossible odds. Later, as I sat alone in the infirmary, nursing my wounds, the Grolock's instructor entered. His massive frame filled the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You did what no one else could," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Had to," I replied, wincing as I adjusted the bandage on my arm. "Otherwise, no one would have taken us seriously." The Grolocks nodded slowly. "They will now. You've proven that humans are more than prey. You are dangerous, clever, unpredictable." He paused, his yellow eyes narrowing. "You've earned their respect and their fear." I didn't respond. He was right. But it wasn't just about earning respect. It was about showing the galaxy what humanity could be. A species that thrived not because of brute strength, but because of ingenuity, resilience, and the refusal to give up no matter the odds. The Academy would remember this day, and so would I.